January 1945. The Ardennes, along the Belgian border. It is 20 degrees below zero. An American unit is pinned down under heavy German artillery fire. They can't lift their heads. They can't move. And most importantly, they are being hunted. A German sniper, hidden somewhere in the thick mist of the pine forest, is picking them off one by one. The only man who could stop this slaughter has just been taken out of the game. Or at least, that's what the enemy thinks. His name is Elias Thorne, rank, sergeant, and he just took a bullet straight into the scope of his rifle. Shards of glass are embedded in his face. Blood is streaming down his right eye, his dominant shooting eye. By every rule of warfare, Elias Thorne is finished. He is partially blinded, his weapon is destroyed, and the enemy holds the high ground over 800 meters away, an impossible distance for a rifle with no scope. But Elias doesn't retreat. He doesn't call for a medic. He does something no military textbook ever taught. He tears off the shattered scope mount. He decides he is going to make the hardest shot of this war with the naked eye, with iron sights, in a blizzard, against an invisible assassin. This is the story of the sniper the army almost kicked out onto the street for insubordination. An alcoholic, a gambler, and every commanding officer's nightmare. But here's what you need to know about Elias Thorne. Before he became the reluctant hero of the Battle of the Bulge, he was the biggest loser you could imagine. Elias was born in the poverty-stricken mountains of Kentucky in 1918. His father was a poacher. His mother left when he was 5. Elias grew up with a rifle in his hand, not to defend his country, but to put food on the table. He had no patriotism. He had no ideals. He had only one talent. He never missed. But that talent came with a price: arrogance. Elias believed rules were made for the weak, not for him. In 1939, he was arrested for a bar fight and for shooting apart a sheriff's sign just to win a $5 bet. The judge looked at Elias's record: 20 counts of disturbing the peace, 5 counts of property damage. He offered the same verdict given to many troubled young men: jail or the military. Elias chose the military. Not because he wanted to fight Hitler, but because he thought the army meant free ammo and a chance to make money playing poker in the barracks. But the US Army of 1,942 didn't know what to do with him. Elias hated the uniform. He hated saluting officers younger than him. He hated discipline. On the range, he purposely missed shots to avoid attention, hoping to lazy his way through the war as a cook or a driver. He wanted to be invisible. He wanted to survive without breaking a sweat. But war has a way of dragging lazy men into the light. You can hide your talent in boot camp, but you can't hide it when your friends start falling. And that is exactly what happened when Elias's unit was deployed to North Africa in 1943. Tunisia, early 1943. The problem with North Africa wasn't the enemy. It was the heat. It cooked you in your helmet. Elias Thorne was content to sit in the back of a supply truck, avoiding the war, avoiding work, and nursing a hangover from cheap local wine. He had successfully convinced his entire platoon that he was incompetent with a rifle. If you can't shoot, they don't put you on the front line. That was his logic. But war has a way of ruining even the best-laid plans. It happened outside the Kasserine Pass. His convoy was ambushed, not by a large force, but by a single, well-positioned German machine gun nest up on a ridge. The lead truck exploded. The convoy stopped. Men were scrambling for cover, diving into the hot sand as 7.92mm rounds chewed up the ground around them. The lieutenant was screaming orders, but nobody could move. The German gunner had the perfect angle. He was pinning down 30 men with just one weapon. 2 soldiers tried to flank the ridge and were cut down immediately. The situation was hopeless. The platoon was sitting ducks, waiting to be slaughtered. Elias was hiding behind the wheel of a truck, smoking a cigarette, waiting for someone else to solve the problem. But nobody solved it. The screaming got louder. The bullets got closer. Elias looked at his cigarette. He looked at the ridge. He sighed. He hated effort. But he hated the idea of dying in the sand even more. It was annoying. The noise was ruining his nap. He didn't crawl. He didn't use tactical movement. He simply stood up behind the cab of the truck. He braced his standard-issue M1 Garand on the side mirror. No scope, just the iron sights shimmering in the heat haze. The distance was 400 yards. A difficult shot for a marksman. An impossible shot for a drunk who supposedly couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. He didn't hesitate. He didn't pray. He exhaled, held his breath for a split second, and squeezed the trigger. One shot. The sound of the Garand was lost in the chaos, but the result was instant. The German machine gun stopped firing. The silence that followed was deafening. Elias racked the bolt, sat back down, and finished his cigarette. The lieutenant ran over, eyes wide. He looked at the ridge, where the German gunner was now slumped over his weapon, and then looked back at Elias. He asked him how he did that. Elias shrugged and said it was a lucky shot. He said he was aiming for a rock and missed. The lieutenant didn't buy it. You don't make a 400-yard headshot with iron sights by accident. The game was up. Elias Thorne's days of being invisible were over. They took away his supply truck duties. They took away his kitchen patrol. They handed him a specialized Springfield 1903 with a high-powered unitel scope. They told him he was now the battalion's designated marksman. He tried to refuse. He told them he had bad eyes. He told them he had a twitch. They didn't listen. For the next 2 years, across Sicily, up through Italy, and into France, Elias Thorne did his job. He didn't do it for glory. He did it because he was good at it, and it was the only way to keep people from yelling at him. He became a legend in his division, the ghost who cleared the way. But now, back in the present day, amidst the freezing hell of the Ardennes, the legend is bleeding. The ghost is blind. We are back in 1945. The cold is biting through Elias's gloves. The pain in his face is sharp, pulsing with every beat of his heart. That German bullet didn't just break his scope. It took away his primary advantage. Without magnification, the enemy is just a speck in the tree line. The German sniper out there is a professional. He knows he hit Elias. He knows the American sniper is wounded. He is waiting for Elias to panic, to try and run, or to peek out to check the damage. This is a game of cat and mouse, but the mouse is blind, and the cat has a high-powered rifle. Elias checks his weapon. The M1 Garand is still functional, but the balance is off without the scope. The iron sights are small, cold pieces of metal. He hasn't fired using iron sights since that day in Tunisia. He wipes the blood from his cheek again. It keeps flowing, obscuring his vision. He has to make a choice. He can stay here, pinned down behind a frozen log, and wait for the Germans to flank them. His squad will die. The young privates behind him, kids who just arrived from the States, are looking at him with terror in their eyes. They know he's the best. They don't know he can't see. Or he can do something stupid, something reckless, something that Snuffy Smith would have done. He realizes that he can't win a shooting match. He can't see the German. He needs the German to reveal himself. He needs the German to make a mistake. But professionals don't make mistakes unless they are provoked. Elias reaches into his pack. He doesn't pull out a bandage. He pulls out a helmet. Not his helmet, a dead man's helmet. He places it on the end of a stick. It's the oldest trick in the book. The dummy head. Every sniper knows it. No experienced shooter falls for it. But Elias isn't trying to trick the German into shooting the helmet. He has a different plan. A plan that relies on the arrogance of a hunter who thinks his prey is already dead. The helmet wobbles on the stick. It looks pathetic. A clear, desperate amateur move. Elias holds it up just above the log, his heart hammering against his ribs. He waits for the crack of the rifle. He waits for the helmet to spin off into the snow. But there is only the wind. The German sniper isn't biting. He is too smart, too disciplined. He knows that no American sergeant would be stupid enough to expose himself like that unless he was trying to draw fire. Elias lowers the helmet. He wipes the freezing blood from his cheek again. The young private next to him is shaking, gripping his rifle so hard his knuckles are white. He whispers to Elias, asking what they are going to do. Elias doesn't answer. He is thinking. He is calculating the odds like he is sitting at a poker table in a smoke-filled barrack. He realizes that the German isn't just a soldier. He is a predator who likes to play with his food. The enemy saw the scope shatter. He knows Elias is hurt. He knows the Americans are leaderless and blind. The helmet trick failed because it looked like a tactic. To catch this German, Elias has to stop acting like a soldier and start acting like the failure everyone thinks he is. He has to make the German believe that the American sniper is dead or incapacitated and that the rest of the squad is panicking. Elias looks at his rifle. The iron sights are just a tiny notch and a post. At 800 yards, the front post will cover a target the size of a man entirely. Aiming is theoretically impossible. You can't see what you are hitting. You have to feel it. Elias turns to the private. He tells the kid to get ready. When Elias gives the signal, he wants the private to fire an entire clip of ammunition into the trees. Not aimed fire, panic fire, just noise and muzzle flash. The kid looks terrified but nods. This is the bluff. Elias is betting the lives of every man in the squad on the arrogance of a man he has never met. Now, Elias whispers. The private pops up and unleashes hell. Bang, 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 bang. 8 rounds form the M, 1 Garand, fly harmlessly into the forest. The kid ducks back down, hyperventilating. It is a perfect performance of terror. To the German watcher on the hill, it looks like the Americans have lost their nerve. It looks like they are spraying and praying, the last gasp of a doomed unit. Silence returns to the valley. Elias lays his cheek against the frozen stock of his rifle. He ignores the pain in his eye. He forces his breathing to slow down. He stares into the grey wall of the tree line. He isn't looking for a man. He is looking for a disruption in the pattern of the snow. And then, he sees it. It is subtle. A shift in the shadows. The German sniper, convinced that the threat is neutralized, is moving. He is shifting position to get a better angle to wipe out the panicking Americans. He steps out from behind the thick trunk of a pine tree. He is confident. He thinks he is invisible. Elias sees a dark smudge against the white background. That is his target. The distance is enormous. The wind is howling from the left. A bullet fired from this range will drop several feet and drift yards off course. With a scope, you adjust the dials. With iron sights, you have to guess. You have to use Kentucky windage. You have to aim at empty air and trust that the bullet will curve into the target. Elias closes his good eye for a second, visualizing the trajectory. He remembers the weight of the bullet, the speed of the powder, the bite of the wind. He isn't a soldier anymore. He is a poacher in the mountains, trying to hit a deer to feed his family, knowing he only has 1 round left. He opens his eye. He raises the muzzle. He aims high. He aims to the left, pointing the gun at a patch of snow far away from the dark smudge. To anyone watching, it looks like he is aiming at nothing. It looks ridiculous. It looks like a miss waiting to happen. The German stops moving. He is setting up his bipod. He is getting ready to kill the private. Elias knows he has less than 2 seconds. The cold steel of the trigger bites into his finger. He doesn't squeeze gently this time. He pulls it with the desperation of a man who knows he is out of time. The rifle kicks against his bruised shoulder. The casing flies into the snow. The sound of the shot echoes through the valley, sharp and lonely. Elias doesn't wait to see the impact. He knows the flight time of the bullet will be over a second. A second is a long time to wonder if you just committed suicide. He ducks his head. He waits. If he missed, the German will fire back instantly. The return fire will tear through the rotting log and kill him. 1 second passes. 2 seconds. The wind howls. The private is staring at him. 3 seconds. Nothing. No return fire. No crack of a supersonic bullet passing overhead. Just the wind. Elias slowly raises his head. He squints through the iron sights again. The dark smudge in the tree line is gone. Or rather, it has changed shape. It is no longer vertical. It is horizontal. The German is down. The threat that pinned down an entire squad for 2 hours has been erased by a single bullet fired from a damaged weapon by a man half blinded by his own blood. Elias doesn't cheer. He doesn't smile. He simply cycles the bolt of his M1 Garand, ejecting the spent casing into the snow, and loads a fresh clip. He is a pessimist by nature. He assumes there is always another shooter, another problem, another way for the universe to ruin his day. Move out, he grunts to the private. The voice is gravelly, tired. It isn't the voice of a hero. It is the voice of a man who just wants this shift to be over. The squad rises from the snow, shaking off the cold and the terror. They move forward cautiously, rifles raised, eyes scanning the tree line. They don't trust the silence. They can't believe it is over. It takes them 20 minutes to cross the valley floor and climb the ridge where the German had been hiding. The snow is deep here, waist-high in places. When they finally reach the tree line, they find him. The German sniper is lying on his back, his rifle a Mauser Kar 98K, with a pristine Zeiss scope lying a few feet away. The young private, the one who had provided the distraction, is the first to reach the body. He stares down in disbelief. He looks back at Elias, who is standing a few yards back, lighting a cigarette with trembling hands. The private looks at the wound. The bullet didn't hit the head. It hit the upper chest, just above the heart. At 800 yards, with iron sights, in a crosswind, Elias had missed his point of aim by maybe 6 inches. But 6 inches was the difference between a clean kill and a messy death. "Sarge," the private whispers, "you got him." With iron sights. At 800 yards, Elias exhales a cloud of blue smoke. He walks over. kicks the German's rifle to make sure it is out of reach, and looks down at his work. He doesn't feel pride. He feels relief that he doesn't have to dodge bullets anymore. He touches the bandage on his face. The pain is coming back now that the adrenaline is fading. I was aiming for his eye. Elias lies. He wasn't aiming for the eye. He was aiming for the white blur of the snowbank and praying to a god he didn't believe in. But legends aren't built on the truth. They are built on what people choose to believe. And in that moment, looking at the dead German and the shattered scope on Elias's rifle, the men of his squad chose to believe they were led by a supernatural marksman. The story of the shot spread through the division faster than a flu virus. By the time they reached the next town, the distance had grown to 1,000 yards. By the time they reached the Rhine, it was a mile. Elias Thorne, the drunk, the gambler, the discipline problem, had ceased to exist. In his place was Iron Sights Thorne, the man who didn't need a scope because he could feel where the bullet was going to go. But the war didn't stop to celebrate a lucky shot. The Battle of the Bulge was raging. The Germans were throwing everything they had at the Allied lines in a desperate last gamble. Elias's unit was pushed forward, deep into the meat grinder. And this brings us to the second part of the legend, the part that history books often leave out because it doesn't fit the clean narrative of heroism. Elias didn't get a new scope. Supply lines were cut. Replacements weren't coming. He was stuck with his M1 Garand and its iron sights. Most snipers would be useless in this situation. A sniper without a scope is just a rifleman. But Elias had changed. Or maybe the war had finally broken him in a way that made him useful. He stopped trying to be a sniper. He started fighting like a hunter. He ditched the rulebook entirely. He began leading his squad on unauthorized night patrols. While other sergeants were digging in and waiting for orders, Elias was out in the darkness, creeping through the frozen woods with a knife and a bag of grenades. He realized that if he couldn't shoot them from a mile away, he would get close enough to smell them. He dragged his squad along with him. These men, who had been terrified privates just days ago, were now following Elias into the jaws of death because they believed he couldn't miss. They believed he was lucky, and in war, a lucky sergeant is better than a smart one. One night, outside the town of Foy, Elias's patrol stumbled upon something massive. It wasn't a patrol. It wasn't a machine gun nest. It was a fueling depot for a German panzer division. Tanks, Tigers and Panthers, sitting in the dark, their crews sleeping, waiting for fuel trucks that were due to arrive at dawn. Elias signaled his men to stop. He looked at the tanks. He looked at the fuel drums stacked nearby. He looked at his iron sights. He had no radio to call for artillery. He had no bazookas. He had 8 men and small arms. A sane man would retreat and report the position. A hero would try to sabotage the tanks. Elias Thorne did neither. He saw a poker game he could win. He saw a chance to end the war a little bit faster so he could go home and get a real drink. He turned to his men and grinned, a bloody, bandage-wrapped grin that looked demonic in the moonlight. "Boys," he whispered, "we are going to steal a tank." The plan was insanity, pure and simple. American infantrymen are not trained to operate German panzer tanks. The control systems are different, the engines are complex, and the labels are in a language none of them speak. But Elias Thorne didn't care about the manual. He cared about the physics of chaos. He knew that in the middle of a freezing night, a sudden explosion of violence creates confusion, and confusion is the only shield they had. They crept toward the depot in a single file, moving like ghosts across the snow-packed ground. The wind was their ally, masking the sound of their boots. Elias led them not to the perimeter, but straight to the center of the formation, right under the noses of the drowsy sentries. He had spotted something earlier, a detail that a by-the-book officer would have missed, but a poacher recognized immediately. One of the tanks, a massive Tiger II, had its engine cover partially open and a mechanic's rag hanging from the hatch. It was being serviced. That meant it was warm. That meant it was ready to start. Elias signaled his squad. He pointed to the fuel drums stacked dangerously close to the vehicles. Then, he pointed to the tank. The orders were silent but clear. Get in, figure it out, blow everything else to hell. They climbed onto the steel beast. The metal was so cold it burned their skin, but the engine compartment radiated a faint, welcoming heat. Elias dropped into the commander's cupola. The interior smelled of oil, sweat, and stale tobacco. He grabbed the private, the kid who had been his spotter, and shoved him into the driver's seat. "It's just a tractor with a gun," Elias lied. "Push the buttons until it roars." Outside, the German camp was waking up. A guard had spotted the movement. A shout rang out, followed by the crack of a rifle shot. The element of surprise was gone. The air instantly filled with the shouts of confused soldiers and the barking of dogs. Searchlights swept the depot, cutting through the darkness. Inside the Tiger, panic was setting in. The private was frantically pulling levers and stomping on pedals. Nothing happened. Bullets began to ping against the heavy armor plating outside like hail on a tin roof. Elias looked through the vision block. Scores of German infantry were rushing toward them. They were trapped in a 60-ton steel coffin. "Start this damn thing!" Elias roared, kicking the back of the driver's seat. And then, the engine caught. The Maybach engine sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life with a sound like a dragon waking up. The vibration shook the fillings in their teeth. The private slammed the gear lever forward. The tank didn't move. He slammed it back. The tracks screeched, tearing up the frozen earth, and the massive vehicle lurched forward. They weren't driving, they were stampeding. The tank smashed through a wooden supply crate, crushing it into splinters. Elias struggled to rotate the turret. He didn't know how to aim the main gun, and he didn't need to. He grabbed the handle of the coaxial machine gun. He squeezed the trigger. Green tracers erupted into the night, soaring through the darkness. He didn't aim at the soldiers. He aimed at the fuel. The first drum exploded in a ball of orange fire, then the second, then the third. The chain reaction was instantaneous. The fuel depot, filled with thousands of gallons of gasoline intended for the German advance, turned into a supernova. The blast wave rocked the Tiger tank, nearly throwing Elias against the steel walls. Outside, the world had turned into an inferno. The fire was so intense, it sucked the oxygen out of the air. The German soldiers who had been rushing them were now scattering, running for their lives from the walls of flame. The other tanks in the depot, the ones sitting cold and dormant, were engulfed. The ammunition inside them began to cook off, adding secondary explosions to the symphony of destruction. "Go! Go! Go!" Elias screamed. The private floored the accelerator. The Tiger tank, wreathed in smoke and lit by the glow of the burning depot, smashed through the perimeter fence. They were driving blind, careening through the forest, crushing trees like matchsticks. They had no map. They had no radio. They were driving a stolen enemy tank deep behind enemy lines, and every German soldier within 10 miles would be looking for them. Elias climbed up through the hatch and looked back. The sky behind them was glowing red, a massive beacon marking their crime. He lit a cigarette, cupping the flame against the wind. His hands were shaking, not from cold, but from the adrenaline crash. He looked at his iron sights, resting on the rim of the hatch. They had done it. They had just crippled an entire Panzer Division's fuel supply with a broken rifle and a bluff. But the night wasn't over. As the adrenaline faded, the reality of their situation set in. They were sitting in a German tank. If they drove this back to the American lines, their own side would blow them to pieces before they could say a word. They were now the enemy to everyone. Elias dropped back into the turret. He looked at his men. They were grinning like maniacs. They were alive. They had just pulled off the greatest heist of the war. But now, Elias had to figure out the punchline. How do you surrender to your own army while driving a Nazi war machine? The sun began to bleed over the eastern horizon, painting the snow in shades of grey and dirty pink. Inside the Tiger tank, the air was foul with the smell of cordite, unwashed bodies, and fear. They had been driving for an hour. The fuel gauge, which they had finally located, was dropping fast. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was that they were driving a 60-ton German war machine straight toward the anxious, trigger-happy lines of the 101st Airborne Division. Elias sat in the commander's hatch, exposed to the freezing wind. He had to stay up there. If he buttoned up, he was blind. If he stayed out, he was a target. He lit his last cigarette. The pack was empty. He crumpled it and tossed it into the wake of churned mud behind them. He looked at the road ahead. It was clogged with debris, frozen bodies, and the wreckage of war. Suddenly, the private driving the tank shouted over the intercom. There was movement ahead. A lot of movement. They weren't approaching the American lines yet. They were catching up to the rear guard of a German infantry regiment that was retreating from the sector. Hundreds of grey-clad soldiers were marching down the road, heads down, exhausted. Elias felt his stomach drop. If they opened fire, they would be swarmed. If they stopped, they would be questioned. There was only one option. The bluff had to continue. Elias kicked the private's shoulder. He told him to keep driving. Don't slow down. Don't speed up. Act like you own the road. The massive Tiger tank rumbled past the marching German soldiers. The infantrymen stepped aside, looking up at the steel giant with reverence. They saw the iron cross painted on the hull. They saw the commander standing in the hatch. In the dim light, wrapped in a scarf and a stolen German greatcoat he had grabbed from the tank's interior, Elias looked just like one of them. Some of the soldiers even waved. One weary officer saluted. Elias offered a stiff, arrogant nod in return. It was the most surreal moment of his life. He was being escorted by the enemy, protected by the very men he had been killing hours ago. But the ride couldn't last forever. The road curved and the trees thinned out. Ahead lay a stretch of open fields. And across those fields, about a mile away, was a dark tree line. That was the American line. Elias grabbed the binoculars hanging around his neck. He focused on the distant trees. He saw the glint of metal, anti-tank guns, 76mm tank destroyers, bazooka teams. They were all dug in, waiting for a target. And the biggest, juiciest target in the Ardennes had just rolled out of the woods. The German infantry began to disperse, taking cover in the ditches, preparing for a defensive stand. They expected the Tiger to move forward and engage the Americans. They expected Elias to start shooting. "Stop the tank," Elias ordered. The tracks screeched to a halt. The sudden silence was terrifying. The German soldiers looked at them, confused. Why was the tank stopping here? It was too exposed. It was in the middle of nowhere. Elias dropped down into the turret. He looked at his squad. They were pale, sweating despite the cold. They knew what was coming. If they drove forward, the Americans would blow them up. If they stayed here, the Germans would realize they were imposters. "Turn the turret," Elias said. The gunner looked at him, confused. "Target? Which target?" "No target," Elias snapped. "Turn the turret around. Point the main gun at the rear. Point it at the Germans." The gunner hesitated. Aiming your main weapon backward is a universal sign of surrender in tank warfare. It means you are non-combatant. It implies you are giving up. But doing it right in front of a German infantry regiment was suicide. "Do it," Elias roared. The hydraulic motor whined. The massive 88mm cannon began to rotate slowly. It turned away from the American lines. It swept past the side of the road. It came to rest, pointing directly back at the German soldiers who were sheltering in the ditches behind them. The Germans froze. They stared at the muzzle of their own tank. They didn't understand. Was the crew defecting? Was it a betrayal? Before they could react, Elias popped back up through the hatch. He didn't have a white flag. He didn't have a flare gun. He had a helmet. An American M1 steel pot helmet. He jammed it onto the barrel of his Thompson submachine gun and waved it frantically in the air toward the American lines. He screamed at the top of his lungs, knowing nobody could hear him over the distance, but screaming anyway. "Don't shoot. It's Sergeant Thorne. It's the damn poker player." A mile away, an American forward observer lowered his binoculars. He looked at the Tiger tank. He saw the gun pointed backward. He saw the lunatic waving an American helmet, and he saw something else. The tank wasn't firing. It was sitting there, a sitting duck, offering its rear armor to the enemy. "Hold fire," the observer radioed. "I repeat, hold fire. Something weird is going on." But the Germans had figured it out. The officer who had saluted Elias realized the betrayal. He screamed an order. A soldier with a Panzerschreck, a German bazooka, popped up from the ditch just 50 yards behind the tank. He leveled the tube at the rear engine block of the Tiger. Elias saw the movement out of the corner of his eye. He didn't have time to aim. He swung his Thompson around and sprayed a burst of .45 caliber rounds at the ditch. The German ducked. The rocket fired, but the aim was thrown off. The projectile hissed past the turret, missing the tank by inches and exploding in the field. "Drive!" Elias screamed. "Drive like hell!" The 60-ton monster lurched forward, tearing up the frozen earth. A Tiger II does not sprint. It rumbles like an earthquake. The private at the controls was flooring the accelerator, pushing the engine to its breaking point. Behind them, the German lines had erupted in fury. Small arms fire pinged uselessly off the rear armor, sounding like hail on a tin roof. But the real danger wasn't behind them. It was straight ahead. They were charging directly into the kill zone of an American anti-tank battalion. To the gunners waiting in the tree line, this looked like a suicide charge. A single German tank, unsupported, rushing their position at dawn. It made no sense. But war doesn't have to make sense to be deadly. The American forward observer was screaming into his radio. trying to confirm if the lunatic waving the helmet was real or a German trick. But the gunners on the 76mm anti-tank guns didn't wait for confirmation. They saw a tiger. They saw a threat. They pulled the lanyard. A high-velocity, armor-piercing shell screamed across the field. It slammed into the front glacis plate of the tiger with the sound of a giant sledgehammer hitting a bell. The impact was terrifying. Inside the tank, the noise was deafening. Dust and rust flakes rained down on the crew, but the Tiger II was built to survive. The American shell, fired from extreme range, failed to penetrate the thick German steel. It ricocheted off into the sky. Elias was thrown against the turret ring. His ears were ringing. He realized the helmet trick wasn't working fast enough. They were going to be turned into scrap metal by their own side before they could explain the joke. He needed to stop the tank, but if they stopped in the open, they were dead. They had to breach the line. They had to get so close that the Americans couldn't fire without hitting their own men. "Don't stop," Elias screamed down the hatch. "Ram them! Ram the tree line!" The private closed his eyes and kept his foot down. The tank roared across the final 100 yards. It smashed through a frozen hedgerow, snapping ancient oak trees like twigs. It crushed a foxhole, thankfully empty, and plowed into the center of the American perimeter. The engine finally choked and died. Silence fell over the clearing. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. The tank sat there, steam rising from its engine deck, smoke pouring from its exhaust, surrounded by 50 American soldiers. 50 M1 Garands, Thompson submachine guns, and bazookas were pointed at the hatches. The air was thick with tension. One sudden movement, one wrong sound, and the squad inside would be riddled with bullets. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the commander's hatch creaked open. Elias Thorne rose from the steel beast. He looked like a demon dug up from the grave. His face was caked in dried blood and soot. His eyes were wild. He was still wearing the stolen German greatcoat. He slowly raised his hands. In one hand, he held the battered American helmet. In the other, he held a pack of German cigarettes he had found in the tank. "Don't shoot," he croaked. His voice was cracked and dry. "I'm Sergeant Thorne, and I need a light." A young captain pushed his way through the circle of soldiers. He had a .45 pistol leveled at Elias's chest. He looked at the tank. He looked at the German coat. He looked at the face of the man who was supposed to be a sniper, not a tank commander. "Thorne?" the captain asked, bewildered. "The sniper? We thought you were dead. We thought your whole squad was Kia." Elias climbed down from the tank. His legs were shaking, but he locked his knees to keep from collapsing. He tossed the German coat onto the snow. He pointed to the tank. "We ran out of ammo," Elias said, deadpan, "so we upgraded." The rest of the squad climbed out, looking just as shell-shocked. The American soldiers lowered their weapons, staring in disbelief. They touched the side of the Tiger tank, as if it were a spaceship that had just landed. They had spent months terrified of these machines, and now, here was one delivered to their doorstep by a drunk sergeant and a bunch of kids. The captain holstered his pistol. He started to laugh. It was a nervous, hysterical laugh. He slapped Elias on the shoulder. "You realize," the captain said, "that you just violated about 50 army regulations, stole enemy property, impersonated an officer, and nearly got your entire squad killed by friendly fire?" Elias finally got a cigarette lit by a nearby soldier. He took a deep drag, the smoke filling his lungs, calming the tremors in his hands. He looked at the captain with his one good eye, the other still swollen shut from the shattered scope. "Sir," Elias said, "I didn't read the rule book. I used it to wipe the dipstick." They were heroes again. But this time, the legend was too big to contain. Iron sights. Thorne hadn't just made a long shot. He had stolen the pride of the Wehrmacht. The tank was painted with American stars within the hour. They didn't have ammunition for the main gun, but they used it as a mobile bunker. But the war wasn't over, and the universe has a way of balancing the scales. You can't cheat death this many times without death taking notice. Elias had used up all his luck. He had used up his bluff. And now, as the Allied forces prepared to push into Germany itself, Elias was about to face a challenge that couldn't be solved with a stolen tank or a lucky shot. He was going to face the man he didn't kill. Remember the sniper? The one Elias shot at 800 yards? The one whose body they found? Well, in war, intelligence is often wrong. The body they found was a spotter, a decoy. The real marksman, the one who had shattered Elias's scope, was still out there. He had watched the whole thing. He had watched Elias steal the tank. He had watched him survive. And now, he was following him. This wasn't a battle for territory anymore. It was a personal vendetta. The German sniper was a spectre, a ghost of the Black Forest, and he had a new mission. He wasn't going to shoot Elias. That was too easy. He was going to wait until Elias felt safe, until the war felt like it was ending. April 1945, the Third Reich was collapsing. American tanks were rolling through the streets of Nuremberg. The once proud German army was surrendering in the thousands. For most soldiers, the war was already over. They were just waiting for the paperwork to be signed. They were dreaming of warm beds, cold beers, and girls back home. But Elias Thorne wasn't dreaming. He wasn't sleeping. He hadn't slept in 3 days. He knew something the others didn't. The war ends when the enemy stops shooting. And his enemy hadn't stopped. The German sniper, the one who had shattered his scope 3 months ago in the Ardennes, was here, in Nuremberg. Elias felt it. It was an itch in the back of his neck, a shadow that moved when he turned his head. He had found signs. A distinct casing left on a rooftop, a message carved into a wooden beam in a captured bunker, "Für den Panzerdieb," for the tank thief. The German wasn't fighting for Hitler anymore. He was fighting for pride. He was hunting the man who had humiliated him. Elias's squad was tasked with clearing a bombed-out industrial sector on the outskirts of the city. It was a maze of twisted steel, shattered concrete, and deep shadows. The perfect hunting ground. Elias told his men to stay back. He told them he was going to scout ahead alone. They argued, but they saw the look in his eyes. It was the look of a man walking to his own execution. Elias moved into the ruins of a locomotive factory. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light, piercing through the destroyed roof. It was quiet, too quiet. The sound of artillery was distant, a dull rumble miles away. Here, the only sound was the crunch of glass under Elias's boots. He stopped. He listened. He heard the click of a bolt. It wasn't far away. It was close, intimately close. Elias dove to his left just as a bullet chipped the concrete pillar where his head had been a second ago. He rolled behind a rusted train engine, his heart hammering against his ribs. That wasn't a warning shot. That was a kill shot, and it came from inside the building. The sniper had ditched the distance. He had closed the gap. This wasn't a shooting match anymore. It was a knife fight with rifles. Elias checked his M1 Garand. 4 rounds left. He checked his pockets. No grenades. He was trapped in a metal box with a ghost who knew every corner of this factory. "Thorne," a voice echoed from the catwalks above. It was heavily accented, calm, and terrifying. "I see you, tank thief." Elias didn't answer. "You don't talk to the Reaper. You move." He crawled under the train engine, dragging his body through oil and grime. He needed to change his angle. He needed to get to the stairs. Another shot rang out. The bullet ricocheted off the steel wheel inches from his face, sending hot metal fragments into his skin. The German was toying with him. He had the high ground. He had the optics. He could see Elias moving through the gaps in the machinery. Elias realized he had made a mistake. He had come here playing the soldier. He had come here with a rifle and a plan. But you don't beat a hunter with a plan. You beat him with instinct. Elias looked at his rifle. The iron sights were useless in this dark, cluttered hell. He couldn't aim. He couldn't see the target. He did the only thing he could think of. He stopped acting like prey. He stood up. He didn't stand up in the open. He stood up inside the cab of the ruined locomotive. He grabbed a heavy iron wrench lying on the floor. He smashed it against the metal wall of the cab. Clang! The sound rang out like a bell. Then he threw his helmet out the left side of the cab. It was the oldest trick in the book. He had used it in the Ardennes. The German sniper would expect it. He would know it was a decoy. He wouldn't shoot the helmet. He would shoot the man throwing it. And that's exactly what Elias was counting on. As soon as he threw the helmet to the left, Elias sprinted to the right. He didn't look up. He didn't look for cover. He ran straight for the open ground in the center of the factory floor. It was suicide. It was madness. It was the last thing a sane person would do. The German sniper, perched on the catwalk, saw the movement. He ignored the helmet. He swung his rifle toward the running figure. He had him. The American was out in the open, exposed, defenseless. The German smiled. He exhaled. He centered the crosshairs on Elias's back. But Elias wasn't running away. He was running toward a shadow, a specific shadow, cast by a massive hanging crane. The German fired. The bullet tore through the fabric of Elias's jacket, grazing his ribs. Elias stumbled, fell, rolled, and disappeared into the darkness of the crane's shadow. He was hit. He was bleeding. But he was alive. And now, he was underneath the catwalk. The German cursed. He had missed. He racked the bolt of his Mauser. He leaned over the railing, trying to spot the American in the gloom below. Elias lay on his back, gasping for air. The pain in his side was white hot. He looked up. Through the metal grating of the catwalk, he could see the soles of the German's boots. He could see the dark shape of the sniper leaning over, searching for him. Elias raised his rifle. This wasn't 800 yards. This was 30 feet, vertical, straight up. But there was a problem. The metal grating was thick. A bullet might deflect. A bullet might shatter. And if he missed, the German would drop a grenade on him, and it would be all over. Elias looked at the iron sights. He looked at the grating. He looked at the German. He realized he couldn't shoot the man. He had to shoot the structure. He aimed not at the boots, but at the rusted bolt holding the section of the catwalk to the wall. It was a 1 in a million shot, a shot that required surgical precision with a weapon designed for trench warfare. "Hey, Fritz," Elias screamed. The German looked down, spotting the muzzle flash a split second too late. The rifle kicked against his shoulder one last time. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, a sharp crack that echoed off the steel walls like a thunderclap. The bullet didn't hit flesh. It struck the rusted iron bolt head-on. For a millisecond, nothing happened. The physics seemed to pause, suspending the moment in time. Then, a groan of tortured metal screamed through the factory. The bolt sheared. The structural integrity of the catwalk, stressed by years of neglect and the vibration of the war, failed instantly. The section where the German sniper was standing detached from the wall. It didn't fall slowly. It swung down like a trapdoor. The German sniper didn't scream. He was a professional to the end. He tried to grab the railing, his gloved hands clawing at the air, but gravity is faster than reflexes. He fell 30 feet, crashing into the heavy machinery below, amidst a shower of rust, dust, and twisted metal. The sound of the impact was sickening, a mix of breaking bones and bending steel. Then, silence returned. The dust swirled in the shafts of light, settling slowly over the wreckage. Elias Thorne didn't move immediately. He stayed in the shadows, his chest heaving, his hand pressing a dirty rag against the bleeding graze on his ribs. He waited. He listened. There was no movement from the pile of debris. No reaching for a pistol. No gasps for air. Just the dripping of water from a broken pipe somewhere in the darkness. Slowly, painfully, Elias stood up. He walked across the factory floor, his boots crunching on the glass. He approached the wreckage of the catwalk. The German sniper was lying on his back, pinned under a steel beam. His body was broken, twisted at unnatural angles, but his eyes were open. He was still alive. Barely. Elias stood over him. The man who had hunted him across Europe, the ghost who had shattered his scope and killed his friends, was now just a dying man in a grey uniform. The German looked up at Elias. His breathing was shallow, a wet, rattling sound. He looked at Elias's rifle. He looked at the iron sights. A faint smile touched the German's lips. It wasn't a smile of friendship. It was a smile of disbelief. He whispered something in German, his voice barely audible. "Ohne Zielfernrohr?" Without a scope? Elias didn't speak German, but he understood the question. He looked down at his battered M1 Garand. The wood was chipped, the metal was worn, and the empty mount where the scope used to be was still jagged and sharp. "Yeah," Elias said softly. "No glass, just iron." The light faded from the German's eyes. His head lolled to the side. The vendetta was over. The hunt was finished. Elias didn't feel triumph. He didn't feel like a hero. He just felt an overwhelming, crushing exhaustion. He felt the weight of every mile he had walked, every shot he had fired, and every lie he had told to survive. He reached down and picked up the German's rifle, which had been thrown clear of the wreckage. It was a masterpiece of engineering. The wood was polished walnut. The Zeisscope was pristine, untouched by the fall. Elias raised it to his eye. He looked through the glass. The world suddenly became clear. He could see the dust motes dancing in high definition. He could see the cracks in the wall on the other side of the factory. It was perfect. It was easy. It was safe. Elias lowered the rifle. He looked at it for a long moment. Then, he turned and swung the weapon by the barrel, smashing the scope against the heavy steel wheel of the locomotive. The glass shattered. The tube bent. He dropped the ruined weapon onto the concrete next to its owner. He didn't need it. He never did. Elias turned and walked toward the exit. The heavy steel doors of the factory were ajar, letting in a blinding stream of white light. He stepped out into the fresh air. The sounds of the city had changed. The artillery had stopped. The machine guns had fallen silent. Instead, he heard something strange. Bells. Church bells were ringing. Not just one, but dozens of them, pealing out across the ruined skyline of Nuremberg. His squad was waiting for him by the half-track. They were sitting on the hood, smoking, looking relaxed. The young private, the one who had driven the Tiger tank, jumped up when he saw Elias emerge from the shadows, bloody and covered in dust. "Sarge!" the kid yelled. "Did you hear? It's over. The radio just confirmed it. The ceasefire is in effect. We're done." Elias stopped. He looked at the bells ringing in the distance. He looked at his hands, stained with grease and blood. He looked at his squad. The war was over. Just like that. 1 minute you are fighting a duel to the death in a factory. The next minute you are a civilian in a uniform. "Sarge?" the private asked, seeing the blank look on Elias's face. "You okay? Did you get him?" Elias reached into his pocket. He found the pack of cigarettes he had taken from the tank days ago. It was empty. He crumpled it and tossed it away. "Let's go home," Elias said. He didn't mention the sniper. He didn't mention the shot at the bolt. He didn't mention the helmet trick. He climbed into the passenger seat of the half-track and closed his eyes. For the first time in 2 years, he slept without dreaming of crosshairs. But stories in the army don't die when the guns stop firing. They grow. They mutate. The men of his squad told the story of the factory. They told the story of the tank. They told the story of the shot in the blizzard. By the time Elias Thorne boarded the troopship heading back to New York, he wasn't just a sergeant anymore. He was a myth. The mountains of Kentucky don't care about medals. They don't care about tanks or snipers or the ruins of Nuremberg. When Elias Thorne stepped off the bus in his hometown in the summer of 1945, nobody threw a parade. The local sheriff, the one whose sign Elias had shot up years ago, just tipped his hat and watched him walk by. Elias walked back to his father's cabin, hung his uniform in the closet, and never put it on again. He didn't talk about the war. When people asked him how he survived the Battle of the Bulge or how he cleared the factory, he would just shrug and say he got lucky. He never mentioned the German sniper. He never mentioned the Tiger tank. He let those stories belong to the men he served with, the ones who needed heroes to believe in. But the legend of Iron Sights, Thorne didn't die. It grew. In VFW halls and barracks across America, the story was told and retold. The distance of the shot grew from 800 yards to a mile. The tank became a column of tanks. Elias became a figure of impossible skill. A man who could shoot the wings off a fly at 1,000 paces without looking. The reality was much quieter. Elias Thorne lived a simple life. He worked at a lumber mill. He married. He raised children. He never hunted again. The man who had been the deadliest shot in the Ardennes never fired another bullet in anger or in sport. He had seen enough of what a bullet could do. Years later, his grandson found an old wooden box under Elias's bed. Inside, there was no Medal of Honor. There were no Nazi souvenirs. Just a battered Zippo lighter with a German eagle on it and a small, rusted piece of metal. It was the broken mount of a rifle scope. The boy asked him what it was. Elias took the piece of metal, turned it over in his calloused hands, and smiled. "That," Elias said, "is the best thing that ever happened to me. It's the thing that taught me to see." See, the war had tried to break Elias Thorne. It had tried to blind him. It had tried to turn him into a killer. But in the end, it just stripped away everything that didn't matter. It took away the scope, the technology, the distance. It forced him to face the world with nothing but his own 2 eyes and his own steady hand. Most heroes in history books are polished. They follow orders. They shine their boots. They salute. Elias Thorne was none of those things. He was a drunk, a gambler, and a thief. He was the soldier nobody wanted. But when the world was freezing and the enemy was closing in, he was the only one who could see the target. He died in 1988, quietly in his sleep. His tombstone doesn't mention the Tiger tank. It doesn't mention the sniper duel. It just gives his name, his rank, and the dates. But if you look closely at the stone, someone, maybe a member of his old squad, maybe just someone who knew the story, has left something on top of the granite. It's not a flower. It's not a flag. It's a single iron rifle sight. Because in a world full of scopes, gadgets, and crutches, sometimes the only thing that saves you is the ability to see things exactly as they are. Elias Thorne proved that you don't need magnification to be a hero. You just need the guts to pull the trigger when everyone else is closing their eyes. And that is the true story of the longest shot of the war. It wasn't about the distance. It was about the clarity,